Catherine wanted to talk about the Constitution, so that is what we are going to do today. This is one of my many copies of a pocket Constitution. I got it at a Constitution Day event my sophomore year of college, and it says, in the very front cover, "The Declaration of Independence was the promise, the Constitution was the fulfillment." Which I think is pretty true. Like, when we talk about the Constitution and the way that we were founded, the Declaration just said a bunch of things. The Constitution established even more things. But before we get started, we need to kind of talk about the origins of the Constitution and the fact that the Constitution was a reactionary document, which I think is super important when it comes to like understanding where we came from with this document and why it was written the way that it was. So when the United States finally got its act together after the Revolutionary War, we joined together in a confederation, and we were governed under the Articles of Confederation, which didn't really serve a really great purpose for the kind of government we had. It didn't meet the needs of our brand new nation, mostly because Congress didn't have the power to regulate commerce. It didn't have the ability to force taxes. Like, it could say, okay, you owe taxes, but it couldn't really do anything about those taxes. It could advocate and appeal to states, but it didn't have any ability to coerce and control them. And so that led to a lot of issues, particularly dealing with various classes of people, farmers versus merchants versus planters, and it did lead to a lot of problems. So in 1787, a group of men met in Pennsylvania to, with the express purpose of revising the Articles of Confederation to be something that we could work with. Unfortunately, it didn't work out that way, and they ended up doing something that I like to call Con-Con. That's the Constitutional Convention. I think we should all call it this. If you disagree with me, you're wrong. We're going to call it Con-Con from now on because it's beautiful that way. Like I said, it was meant to revise the Articles of Confederation, not come up with like a whole new system of government, but that's what we ended up doing with the Constitutional Convention. A lot of revolutionary leaders were not present. Jefferson, Adams, and Thomas Paine were over in Europe during European things. Really, the two major founding fathers that were there at the Constitutional Convention that were also present during the Revolution were George Washington and Benjamin Franklin. Joining them were 53 other men, all of whom were relatively wealthy, there with the purpose of strengthening and preserving government, particularly a central government, and they wanted to put a curb in unrestrained democracy, so things like Shays' Rebellion wouldn't happen again. So they got to the Constitutional Convention, they realized the Articles of Confederation were not going to work for them, and they came up with two major plans to have a representative government that was quite a bit stronger. Those plans were known as the Virginia Plan and the New Jersey Plan. The Virginia Plan was favored by larger states. It provided a bicameral legislature with both houses based on population. The New Jersey Plan was favored by smaller states with a unicameral legislature and equal representation for all states. After this very long, hot summer in Pennsylvania, they landed on the Great Compromise, which allowed for a bicameral legislature like in the Virginia Plan, with one house, the lower house, based on population, and the upper house based on equal representation for all states. So Madison wrote it, and it's beautiful. The Constitution is beautiful. It consists of 7 articles that lay out the foundation of American government. Article 1 deals specifically with the legislative branch. It establishes rules for the House and Senate, how they make laws, the responsibilities of Congress, and the powers denied to Congress that are explicitly denied to Congress. It also talks about powers that are explicitly denied to states. So we talk about legislative branch. That's where everything in the legislative branch comes from. Article 2 deals with the presidency. It establishes like how the president's elected, like the Electoral College, and it talks about presidential duties and powers and things the president is prohibited from doing. Article 3 establishes the judiciary branch. It establishes the Supreme Court and the lesser courts, and it talks about the kinds of cases that the Supreme Court is allowed to hear, namely no criminal court, like no criminal trials. Those need to be done by a trial by jury. Article 4 talks about the way that states interact with one another, including full faith and credit, and something that's really relevant to this today is we're talking about same-sex marriage. States have to recognize and give full faith and credit to the records of other states. So if a same-sex couple gets married in Massachusetts, like, based on full faith and credit, you have to recognize it in Texas or Oklahoma. Like, you have to. My parents got married in Iowa, like 25 years ago, and you have to recognize that they're married in every state. Like, they lived in 6 states, they haven't had to get remarried every time. Anyway, that's where full faith and credit is relevant today. It also talks about the admission of more states as the country were to grow. Article 5 talks about how we need to amend the Constitution, which is also really important, because, like, the Constitution was meant to be changed, and they specifically wrote in, okay, here's how we change the Constitution when it needs to be changed, and I think that's super awesome. Article 6 talks about general provisions under the new government, specifically talking about debts that were accrued under the government of the Articles of Confederation had to be taken over by this new government under the Constitution. It talks about how the Constitution is the supreme law of the land, and how that elected officials at both state and federal levels are bound to support the Constitution. Article 7 talks about ratification, that once 9 of the 13 states had ratified it, the supreme law of the land became the Constitution. But there were some issues when it came to ratification, namely the anti-federalists. Anti-federalists were in states like Virginia, and I lost my note card for this one. That's not good. Anti-federalists were from states like Virginia, and they felt that it affected them adversely because they didn't really have a whole lot to gain under the Constitution. They were overwhelmingly poor, more rural, and more likely to be in debt. Anti-federalists were. Federalists were people who were usually a little bit wealthier and were in support of this strong centralized government. And the major difference between Virginia and New York was the Federalist Papers in terms of ratification. John Jay, James Madison, and Alexander Hamilton wrote the Federalist Papers, which I like to call the DVD commentary of the U.S. Constitution, because it talks about like how it works, like how does this work? How do we have a government? Like, why did we come up with the things that we came up with, and why? And the most important one is Federalist Paper 10 in terms of like persuading people to vote in favor of this Constitution, especially in the state of New York. And that basically said that the 10th Federalist Paper said that it's impossible to have a republic over such a large territory. We need a representative democracy to properly express our needs. And then it passed. But what happened was a lot of states passed the Constitution under the provision that a Bill of Rights also come into play. And the Bill of Rights is seen as our like integral rights. It's the most important thing that affects us on a daily basis in our daily lives and how we're affected by the Constitution. And those are the first 10 amendments, which were actually, written by James Madison and adopted in the same way that we expressed in Article 5. So the first 10 amendments, brief highlight wheel. We talk about freedom of the press, freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom to peaceably assemble, and the petition of government for redress of grievances. We talk about the right to bear arms. We talk about quartering of soldiers, and search and seizure, and rights during trials, and the right to a speedy and public trial, and like trial by jury, excessive bail. We're talking about just because, and Article 9, or not Article 9, the 9th Amendment talks about how just because amendment is not a right is not specifically enumerated here, it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. Like, we have rights that exist beyond that. The 10th Amendment says that powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution nor prohibited by it to the states are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. And then we go on and we talk about some other amendments that we see talking about voting rights, and we talk about establishing how presidential succession works, and we talk about establishing income taxes, and we talk about all these different other things. And this is what affects us on a daily basis. Like, the amendments to the Constitution are the things that we see in our lives, and there are 27 of them, and I think that they affect us as individuals more than the 7 articles do. The most recent one is the 27th Amendment, which says that basically Congress can't raise its own pay without a period of, an election of representatives. So you can't raise your pay this term. You have to wait till the next term, which was, fun fact, one of the initial amendments written by James Madison in 1789, and it didn't get passed until 1992. That is 203 years of waiting for ratification. There are a lot of really interesting things that we have to talk about when we talk about the Constitution and its foundations and all that jazz. But really, this little booklet right here, the words that were written here so long ago, this is a foundation of a government. Like, this is what we stand on, and this is how we are governed. Like, yeah, we can make more rules over it, but this is what works for us. This is what we've decided is the best thing for our government, and the best part about the Constitution is that at some point we might decide, okay, this doesn't work for us. So you can amend the Constitution in a couple of different ways that are set forth in Article 5, right? Or we can scrap it and come up with something new altogether, which I think is so cool. Like, the founders knew, okay, this might not work for us for always, so let's come up with a different way to go about it. And I just think that that is really insightful and really amazing.